Imagine you are running a fast-growing company. You're the boss.
Right.
And one of your mid-level employees, like a really bright, ambitious kid, comes into your office.
Right.
And they ask for $5,000 to launch this guerrilla marketing stunt. They want to set up a food truck downtown, hand out your product for free, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, but you have a decade of experience in this exact industry, with absolute mathematical certainty that this food truck idea is just a complete waste of time.
Right. It's going to fail.
It's not going to move the needle.
Yeah.
It won't scale. It is a guaranteed failure. So what do? I mean, most logical managers would just say no, right? Save the $5,000, tell the kid to get back to their desk.
Which makes total sense on paper.
Exactly. But today, we are going to explore why Silicon Valley's most ruthless, successful operators would not only let that employee do it, but would actively encourage them to fail.
It sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean, we are all conditioned to think of leadership as, preventing mistakes.
Right. Keep the ship from sinking.
Exactly. But when you study the architecture of truly massive organizations, you start to realize that leadership is actually about engineering a system that can absorb the right kinds of mistakes in order to maximize velocity.
Right, let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is to really extract those hidden structural forces, the underlying power dynamics and the mechanical truths of maximizing organizational output.
And we have a great blueprint for this today.
We do. We're using a very specific blueprint. It revolves heavily around this legendary masterclass simply titled How to Operate, which was delivered by the expert operator Keith Rabois. He helped build PayPal, LinkedIn, Square, just to name a few.
Some massive hitters.
Yeah, but we are also layering in and synthesizing this massive archive of insights from Silicon Valley's top founders and investors. I mean, we're talking the minds behind Airbnb, Stripe, Y Combinator, Andreessen Horowitz.
We're essentially looking for the common physics that all of these giants use to scale. And that concept of, physics is exactly the right framing. To anchor everything we're going to talk about today, we really have to look at Andy Grove.
The legendary former CEO of Intel.
Yeah, exactly. Grove had this incredibly simple, yet totally profound definition of leadership. He said a manager's job is simply to maximize the output of their organization.
Maximize output.
That is the entire job description. It is not about, buying ping pong tables for the break room. It's not about standing on a desk and giving this visionary Steve Jobs-esque speech every morning.
Right.
It is about the brutal, brilliant mechanical physics of executing at scale. You're building an engine.
Which is a beautiful end state. I mean, we all want to run a flawless engine.
Oh, absolutely.
But we have to be honest with you, the listener, about where this journey actually begins. Because before you can build a polished machine that practically runs itself, you have to survive the chaotic reality of day one.
And day one is messy.
So messy. On day one, there is no machine. There's just a whiteboard, sheer panic, a diet of cold pizza, and 100-hour work weeks. You are essentially falling off a cliff and trying to assemble an airplane on the way down.
Which is why the very first concept we need to embrace is the necessity of temporary brokenness.
Temporary brokenness. I love that phrase.
Yeah, founders like Adora Chung and Sam Altman talk about this extensively. In the early days, temporary brokenness is actually vastly superior to permanent paralysis. You just cannot optimize a system that doesn't yet exist.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that. Why is it so dangerous to try and build the perfect automated system right out of the gate? Because, it feels like you would be saving time by building it right the first time.
Right, because you don't actually know what right is yet.
Okay.
Yeah, Adora Chung points out that if you try to automate your operations too fast, you permanently lose the ability to iterate.
Because you're locked in.
Exactly. When you write code to automate a process, you are baking your current assumptions into stone. If your assumptions about what the customer wants are wrong.
And in the beginning, they almost always are wrong.
Right. You've just built a highly efficient machine that does the exact wrong thing. So early operations are entirely about doing things that do not scale.
You are manually handling the customer service emails. You are using literal or digital duct tape to hold the product together. You are the QA team. And, sometimes you are the literal delivery driver.
And by doing that, you feel the friction. You feel exactly where the process hurts. Sam Altman notes that in this messy phase, pivots are not a sign of failure. They are expected. They are highly valuable.
Right. You want to pivot.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only metric that matters early on is the speed of your feedback loop. He points out that software startups have a massive structural advantage here because their feedback loop can be measured in hours.
Like literally hours.
Yeah, you push a feature at noon, users hate it by 2 p.m., you analyze the complaints, fix the code, and push an update by 6 p.m.
But if you had spent 6 months building this massive, rigid, automated architecture for that feature before launching it, you wouldn't be able to pivot at 6 p.m. You'd be totally locked in.
Precisely. And this required tolerance for chaos? It dictates how you should structure your team, too. Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, makes a fascinating point here regarding management.
What does he say?
He calls worrying about management structure in the early days a success problem.
Meaning it's a problem you only earn the right to worry about after you've actually built something people are willing to pay for?
Yes. Founders, they love to draw org charts.
Oh, they love it. The boxes, the lines.
They love to figure out who is going to be the VP of this and the director of that. Graham says this is a complete waste of time. At the very beginning, the mathematically optimal state for productivity is a completely flat structure.
Flat.
Every single person in the room reports directly to the founder, period.
Because you don't want a complex matrix of middle managers when there are only like 12 of you.
Yeah.
It just creates artificial distance between the people building the product and the people actually using it.
Right.
You need everyone in the trenches.
And while you are in those trenches, you cannot try to boil the ocean. You can't build the entire polished machine all at once. You have to find what Aaron Levy calls the wedge.
The wedge.
You must start intentionally, almost uncomfortably small.
Let's use the PlanGrid example to illustrate this because I think it perfectly captures the wedge concept. So PlanGrid is a company that went into the commercial construction industry.
A notoriously difficult industry.
Extremely. If you look at commercial construction, it is massive, complex, and notoriously slow to adopt new technology.
Right.
So a typical founder might look at that industry and say, okay, we're going to build an end-to-end cloud platform to manage supply chains, payroll, and heavy machinery logistics.
Which is a recipe for instant death.
Total death.
You would be fighting deeply entrenched incumbents on a dozen different fronts simultaneously.
So PlanGrid didn't do that. They found a tiny, highly specific inefficiency. They realized that the industry was spending something like $4 billion a year just printing out physical blueprints.
$4 billion on paper.
Just on paper. And on a massive job site, if an architect makes the tiny change to a load-bearing wall, you have to print hundreds of new blueprints, physically drive them to the site, and somehow make sure every single foreman throws away the old version and uses the new one.
Which they never do.
Never. So it's a logistical nightmare that leads to incredibly expensive mistakes.
It is a completely broken, paper-based system sitting right in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar industry.
So PlanGrid created a wedge. The iPad had just come out. They built a mobile app strictly to digitize those blueprints. Nothing else.
They didn't do payroll.
Nope. They didn't do supply chain. They just made the experience of viewing and updating a blueprint on an iPad absolutely flawless. They slipped into that one specific gap, dominated it, and once they were on the iPads of every foreman on the site, then they expanded to take over the broader enterprise architecture.
That is the mechanical brilliance of the wedge. You find one discrete problem that the big players are ignoring because it seems too small, and you solve it so perfectly that you become indispensable.
But this brings up a massive operational paradox.
Oh.
Yeah, if the early days require this frantic, duct-taped hero mode, where founders are doing everything manually, fetching coffee, handling support, and obsessively focusing on one tiny wedge.
Right.
How do you know when it's time to stop being the hero? At some point, doing everything yourself becomes a bottleneck, right? How do you transition from being the person swinging the hammer to the architect designing the building?
That is the great filter of startups. Most companies fail precisely at that transition point because the founder refuses to let go.
They want to keep swinging the hammer.
Exactly. That shift from hero to architect requires a fundamental psychological shift in the leader's identity. They have to stop doing the work. They have to stop writing every line of the story.
They have to become the editor.
Yes.
Right.
This is Keith Rubwau's ultimate operating metaphor, and it is the core paradigm shift we need to explore. The CEO, or any senior leader's job, is not to write. It is to edit.
Think about that visually. When you are writing a draft of a novel, which is essentially what an early startup is, you are generating words. You are creating something out of nothing. It's messy, it's emotional, you are in the weeds.
Right.
But an editor approaches the manuscript entirely differently. You aren't generating the words anymore. You are protecting the narrative. You are shaping the flow.
And the very first tool of an editor, physically and conceptually, is the red pen.
The red pen.
The most important high-leverage task an editor has is to cross things out. Simplification is the ultimate weapon of scale. Rabois argues that if an initiative, a product feature, or a marketing pitch cannot be simplified into a repeatable framework,
Like a tweet, right?
literally,
Yeah.
he uses the metric of a 140-character tweet. If it can't fit in that, then it is too complex to be executed successfully by a large organization.
I can hear the pushback from managers right now. They'll say, look, our business is B2B enterprise software. The sales cycle is 18 months long. The integration requires legacy mainframes. It is fundamentally complicated. We can't simplify it into a tweet.
And Rabois would look them in the eye and say, you are wrong, and your complexity is hiding your lack of clarity.
Wow.
You can change the world in 140 characters. If you cannot distill the core value proposition down to a single sentence, it means you don't actually understand the problem you're solving.
That's powerful.
An organization of 500 people cannot execute on a multi-layered, ambiguous, 6-page directive. Every step you eliminate in a process, every caveat you remove from a strategy, improves the execution performance of your team by 30 to 50%. The red pen forces clarity.
But wait, if the leader is just sitting there crossing things out, aren't they just acting as a critic? I mean, how does an editor actually guide the work without rewriting it themselves?
They do it by asking clarifying questions. When a great writer hands an editor a messy draft, the editor doesn't just retype the chapter. They interrogate the text.
They poke holes.
Exactly. They poke holes in the logic. They ask, what is the actual competitive advantage here? Are we doing this because the customer wants it or because our competitor just announced it? What happens if we try to ship this in 4 weeks instead of 8?
Peter Thiel's strategy in venture capital is a brilliant real-world application of this.
Oh, absolutely.
When his firm does due diligence on a company, they could theoretically ask 1,000 questions about the supply chain, the HR policies, the lease on the office space. But they don't.
No, they don't care about the lease.
They narrow their entire investigation down to the 1, 2, or maybe 3 variables that will actually dictate whether the business succeeds or fails, and they ruthlessly focus their questions only on those points.
Because asking extraneous questions drains the organization's energy. It distracts the team from their actual job of building the company. The editor's questions should act as a forcing function to ensure the team's logic is perfectly sound, without doing the thinking for them.
So you simplify with the red pen, you guide with clarifying questions, and then you have to manage the physical layout of the operation. Rabois compares this to a managing editor at a major newspaper.
Imagine you are running the New York Times.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a massive geopolitical event happens. The managing editor realizes that the Middle East desk is now the absolute center of the news cycle, while the sports desk is relatively quiet.
Right.
The editor doesn't go out and report the news themselves. They physically reallocate resources. They pull their best investigative journalists off the sports desk and put them on a plane to the Middle East.
That makes sense.
A startup leader does the exact same thing with talent. You constantly monitor where the highest impact opportunities are, and you shift your strongest engineers and marketers to those specific bottlenecks.
And the final function of the editor is maintaining a consistent voice. Like if you pick up an issue of The Economist, you don't look at the bylines. It doesn't matter who wrote the article. Every single piece feels like it was written by the exact same omniscient entity. Or look at Apple.
Apple is the gold standard for this.
Everything they do feels unified. The minimalist hardware design, the specific phrasing on their website, the pristine layout of the physical retail stores, the packaging of the iPhone box.
The feeling of peeling the plastic off.
Yes. It all feels like it stems from one singular mind.
Though it is worth noting a funny caveat Rabois mentions. If you talk to Apple employees about their internal HR tools or expense reporting software, they will quickly tell you it does not feel like an Apple product at all.
Oh, I'm sure it's clunky.
Very clunky. It is nearly impossible to maintain 100% consistency everywhere. But that external-facing consistency has to be the target. The PR release, the recruiting page, the automated customer support email, they all need to sound like they come from the same editor.
Okay, the editor metaphor is incredibly powerful, but there is a massive dependency built into it. An editor is completely useless if they don't have world-class writers generating the drafts.
Very true.
If the leader's just editing, where do they get the raw material? How do they find the right people to actually push the boulder up the hill?
This is where we transition into the structural taxonomy of talent. Robois introduces a concept called barrels versus ammunition, and once you understand this framework, it completely shatters how you look at hiring and scaling a team.
Let's define the terms. What is ammunition?
Ammunition represents the vast majority of your workforce, including the truly great, highly intelligent, highly talented people. Ammunition is not an insult.
It just sounds like one.
It does, but it's not. These are people who are capable of executing at an exceptionally high level, but they require direction. They need a project manager to define the scope. They need a leader to point them at a target. They were incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
but they have to be loaded into a system to be effective.
They need the task assigned to them in Jira before they can start coding.
Yes. But barrels are an entirely different species of employee. Barrels are those rare individuals who can take an abstract, poorly defined idea from inception, figure out the scope, gather the resources, execute the work, ship the final product, and most importantly, pull other people along with them through sheer force of will.
The fascinating mechanical truth here is that a company's velocity is strictly limited by its number of barrels. I mean, you could have a massive influx of cash and hire 50 brilliant engineers tomorrow. You just bought a ton of ammunition.
A ton of it.
But if you only have one barrel in the company, your overall output will not increase. In fact, it might actually decrease because now you have 50 people standing around waiting for that one barrel to give them direction, approve their code, and unblock their projects.
It is the physics of a bottleneck.
Hmm.
You can only shoot through the number of unique barrels you have on hand. If you have a one-barrel company and you manage to hire a second barrel, you don't just add a little bit of productivity.
You literally double it.
You literally double your organization's output overnight.
But the million-dollar question for anyone listening is, how do you identify a barrel before you hire them or before you promote them? Everyone's resume says they are a proactive self-starter who takes initiative. Nobody puts, I am ammunition and I need to be told what to do on their LinkedIn profile.
Which is why traditional interviews often fail to identify them. Robois has this amazing diagnostic method he developed during his time at Square. It is famously known as the smoothie test.
I want to spend some time on this because on the surface it sounds absolutely ridiculous. Tell us the setup.
Okay, so at Square, Robois noticed that the engineering team was working incredibly hard. They were consistently staying at the office until 9 p.m. or later to ship product. He wanted to reward them and boost morale.
Makes sense.
So he went to a relatively new employee and gave them a highly specific task. He said, figure out how to deliver ice-cold, fresh smoothies to the engineers at their desks at exactly 9 p.m. every night.
Now, if I am a senior operator listening to this, my first instinct is to push back. Isn't this just glorified hazing? You hire a smart person to help build a financial technology company, and you tell them to go fetch drinks. How is fetching a smoothie a valid test of complex operational leadership?
Because fetching the smoothie isn't the test. Engineering the system under strict constraints is the test. Let's break down the operational complexity of that simple request.
Okay, let's do it.
Smoothies melt. That is a hard physical constraint. You cannot order them at 7 p.m. and let them sit around. They have to be fresh. Finding a high-quality juice bar that is actually open and fully staffed in San Francisco at 9 p.m. is difficult.
Right.
Coordinating a delivery driver who will reliably show up exactly on time every single night is notoriously hard. Furthermore, the Square office, like most tech offices, had heavy security. A random delivery driver cannot just walk into the building and wander over to the engineering pods at night.
So the employee has to figure out the vendor, negotiate the after-hours production, manage the cold chain logistics of transport, bypass the building security protocols without violating them, and orchestrate the final delivery without interrupting the engineers while they're in a flow state.
Exactly. Robois noted that highly experienced office managers and executive assistants had failed at this exact type of task before. They would complain that the juice bar closed at 8 p.m., or the delivery guy got lost, or the smoothies were warm. They would bring excuses.
But this specific employee didn't bring excuses. They engineered the system. The smoothies arrived exactly at 9 p.m. They were ice cold. They were handed directly to the engineers.
And Robois' reaction was not, great, I have a good smoothie delivery person. His immediate reaction was, this person is a barrel. They demonstrated the ability to anticipate failure points, navigate constraints, and execute an abstract mandate flawlessly. Once you identify that trait, you immediately load them with heavier ammunition. You slowly expand their scope of responsibility, you give them a low-level product launch, then a major partnership negotiation, then a whole department.
You essentially keep piling weight on them until the system breaks. Because everybody eventually reaches a level of complexity they cannot handle. But your job as the editor is to push them until you find their absolute structural limit.
And finding those barrels early on has compounding consequences. Patrick and John Collison, the brothers who founded Stripe, talk deeply about the mathematics of early hiring. They have a brilliant heuristic. Hiring your first 10 people isn't actually just hiring 10 people. You're essentially hiring your first 100 people.
It's the multiplier effect. If you hire a true barrel as employee number 4, that barrel is not going to tolerate working with mediocre ammunition.
Absolutely not.
They are going to reach into their own network and recruit other high-performing barrels. They will set the standard for what is acceptable in the office.
Conversely, if you compromise and hire a B player just to fill a seat, that B player will eventually be tasked with interviewing the next wave of candidates. B players are psychologically threatened by A players, so they will naturally hire C players to protect their own status.
So the culture just cascades downward.
It degrades exponentially.
This concept of the organizing trait over raw technical skill is echoed by Paul Graham when he talks about the founders of Airbnb, Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia. Graham likes to point out that they were not your typical Silicon Valley tech wizards.
No, they weren't.
They didn't have PhDs in computer science from Stanford. They went to the Rhode Island School of Design. They were art school guys.
But what made them uniquely successful, the reason Airbnb survived when 100 other clones failed, was that they were incredibly gifted at organizing people and executing projects. They were the ultimate barrels. They could take the chaos of a market, design a system to corral it, and convince hosts and guests to trust each other.
The technical code was just the ammunition they used to achieve the organizational goal.
Exactly.
So, practically speaking, if a listener wants to know who the barrels are in their current organization tomorrow morning, how do they find them without launching a covert smoothie operation?
Rabois offers a very simple physical diagnostic. Just stand up and watch your open office for an hour. Pay attention to the foot traffic. Observe who people naturally walk up to when they're stuck.
Oh, that's clever.
If there's a product manager or a mid-level engineer who constantly has people at their desk asking for advice, asking for clarification on strategy, or asking for help on blocking a project, even if those people do not officially report to them on the org chart, that person is your barrel.
The organization operates like water. It naturally flows around the artificial rocks of the official org chart to find the path of least resistance, which leads directly to the people who actually solve problems.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, once you have identified your barrels, your primary directive as a leader is to empower them. But we have to be very precise about what empowering actually means. Empowering people fundamentally means letting them make decisions. And letting them make decisions introduces the very real mathematical probability of failure.
And here is the psychological friction for the founder. If the ship sinks, the market doesn't care that you delegated the decision to a barrel. The investors are going to look at you. It is still your fault.
Always.
So how do you actually let go? How do you delegate decision-making authority without just abjectly advocating your responsibility to the company?
This requires moving beyond gut feelings and using a formalized system. Peter Thiel developed a brilliant framework that Rabois heavily utilizes. It is a 2x2 conviction and consequence matrix. It mathematically dictates exactly when a leader must step in and when they must aggressively step back.
Imagine a standard graph with 4 quadrants. On the vertical axis, you have your level of consequence. If this decision goes completely wrong, does it bankrupt the company or does it just cost us a few $1,000s?
Right.
On the horizontal axis, you have your level of conviction. How confident are you, based on your own expertise, that your preferred solution is the absolute right way to go?
Let's start with the easiest quadrant to understand, but the hardest for control freaks to actually execute. Low consequence, low conviction. You don't really know the right answer, and it honestly doesn't matter much to the bottom line if the project fails.
This brings us right back to the hook of our deep dive, the $5,000 food truck stunt.
Exactly. Rabois gives this exact example from his time at Square. An employee named Kyle came to him with an idea for an inter-Square marketing program. Kyle wanted to set up a literal food truck in his city square, hand out free food, and give merchants free Square credit card readers.
Now, put yourself in Rabois' shoes. He has a decade of deep operational experience in digital payments. He looks at this food truck idea and he knows with near certainty that handing out physical card readers from a truck is not going to acquire high-value merchants at scale.
It is a B+ idea at best.
Right. But he runs it through the matrix. What is the consequence? It costs a few $1,000s for the truck rental and the hardware. Square had millions in the bank. The consequence of failure was virtually zero. So what did Rebois do? He completely delegated the decision. He told Kyle to go do it.
He let him take the company credit card and execute a flawed plan. Why?
Yeah, why?
Because the cost of the failure was cheaper than the cost of demoralizing a high-potential employee. Kyle ran the food truck program. After a few weeks, Kyle looked at his own data, realized the customer acquisition cost was astronomical, and recognized the logistical nightmare of managing physical inventory on a truck.
He figured it out himself.
Kyle shut the program down himself. He learned a massive lesson about scale and unit economics, and he learned it through his own agency. That is the physics of good delegation. You buy education for your barrels at the cost of low-consequence mistakes.
But let's flip the board. What happens when you are in the opposite quadrant? High consequence, high conviction. The decision could wreck the company, and you are absolutely certain you know the right path.
In that quadrant, the leader cannot delegate the final call. You cannot let someone accidentally steer the ship into an iceberg just so they can learn a lesson.
Yeah, that would be insane.
You have to make the decision. But as Sam Altman points out, how you communicate that decision is the dividing line between great managers and terrible ones.
Altman has a great breakdown of this. He says bad delegation sounds like this. Hey, this feature launch is critical. I want you to go research the market, pull all the analytics, build a slide deck with your recommendations, and bring it to my desk on Friday so I can make the decision.
Which completely strips the employee of their agency. You have turned a highly paid, brilliant barrel into a glorified research assistant. They will hate working for you.
Good delegation, even on a high-stakes decision where you hold the veto power, sounds entirely different. Altman says you sit them down and say, you are incredibly smart, which is why I hired you. This decision is critical. Here is exactly how my brain is modeling this problem. Here are the 3 variables I am deeply terrified of. Here is the outcome we must avoid. I want you to take this framework, go figure it out, and I trust you to make the final call.
You provide the rigid intellectual framework, but you transfer the agency of the execution to them. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, calls this the art of navigating paradoxes.
The paradoxes.
A great founder is constantly fluidly shifting between these states. They know exactly when they need to drop down into the weeds and micromanage the granular details of a high-consequence data migration. And they know exactly when to walk out of the room and let a junior marketer blow $5,000 on a food truck.
It requires an insane amount of self-awareness.
Oh.
But here is the massive hole in this theory. If you are delegating heavily, especially as the company scales to hundreds of people, you physically cannot be in the room when 99% of the day-to-day decisions are being made.
That's just a physical reality.
You can't draw a 2x2 matrix on a whiteboard for every single email your team sends. So what is the invisible hand that guides your team's choices when you are not there to supervise them?
That invisible force is the most misunderstood word in business: culture. When people hear startup culture, they usually think of superficial perks. They think of cold brew on tap, beanbag chairs, and bringing your dog to work.
The fun stuff.
But in the actual mechanics of an operation, culture is a highly technical, vital tool. John Collison from Stride has the best definition of this I have ever heard. He defines culture not as a vibe, but as a resolution to a bandwidth problem.
Let's translate that academic phrasing into reality. A bandwidth problem, meaning as a founder, you literally do not have enough hours in the day to sit in on every marketing sync, every product review, and every sales call. Your physical bandwidth is maxed out.
Exactly. When it's just 2 founders in a garage, you don't need culture. You just talk to each other. When you are 500 people spread across 3 time zones, you physically cannot be involved.
Right.
Culture is this set of rigid invariants, the core principles that you hammer into the organization so that when an employee faces a dilemma in a room you are not in, they magically make the exact same decision you would have made. Culture is the ghost of the founder. It is the operating system for decentralized delegation.
Alfred Lin, who was instrumental in building the legendary culture at Zappos before becoming a massive partner at Sequoia Capital, argues that culture is actually the single most vital input in the black box of a company that dictates long-term financial output.
And he isn't just speaking philosophically. He has the macroeconomic data to back it up. He looked at the historical performance of companies listed on the Fortune 100 Best Places to Work list. Over a sustained period, those highly cultured companies saw an annualized stock market return return of 11.08%.
11%.
That was almost double the return of the standard S&P 500 and Russell 3000 indices over the same time frame. Treating employees with deep respect, building high-trust environments, and aligning around core values is not a charity exercise. It translates directly to alpha and financial dominance.
But a culture isn't forged by writing a list of nice words on a wall placard. Culture is only forged when it is tested under extreme pressure. Ben Horowitz provides a visceral, almost uncomfortable example of how culture is tested in the real world. He calls it the acid test of culture, the raise.
Oh, this is a scenario that strikes fear into the heart of every manager.
Tell me about it.
Imagine you manage a team of engineers. You have one absolutely stellar employee. They work 80-hour weeks. They fix the hardest bugs. They're universally loved. One random Tuesday, they walk into your office, close the door, and say, "Google just offered me $20,000 more a year. I love it here, but I have a family. I need a raise right now or I have to leave."
The immediate, visceral, human instinct is to say yes. Your stomach drops at the thought of losing them. You want to reward them. You want to keep the peace. You have the budget. Why not just give them the 20 grand and send them back to their desk?
Because as a leader, you cannot make decisions in a vacuum. Horowitz warns that you have to view that single interaction through the eyes of the entire organization. Let's play out the physics of what happens if you say yes.
Okay, let's play it out.
You shake their hand, you approve the off-cycle raise. That employee is ecstatic. They walk out of your office, and as Horowitz famously referenced, they do the Bobby Shmurda shmoney dance right down the hallway.
For those who don't remember the 2014 viral hip-hop phenomenon, the shmoney dance is this incredibly vibrant physical manifestation of triumphant joy. You throw your hat in the air, you are twisting your hips, you are celebrating. The employee is thrilled.
But who is watching the dance?
The quiet engineer in the corner.
Exactly. Imagine a second engineer sitting 3 desks down. They are equally talented, they work just as hard, but they are an introvert. They didn't ask for a raise because they assumed management would eventually recognize and reward their hard work during the annual review. That quiet engineer watches the shmoney dance, figures out what just happened, and has a terrifying realization.
They realize, oh, I have been playing the wrong game. The way to get paid in this company isn't to put my head down and ship flawless code. The way to get paid is to march into the boss's office, threaten to quit, and aggressively demand cash.
You have just accidentally detonated your culture. In one stroke, you have incentivized aggressive lobbying and office politics over actual operational performance. You have essentially taught your entire company that they have a fiduciary responsibility to their own families to constantly hold you hostage for more money.
So what is the structural solution to this nightmare? Because if you say no, you lose your best engineer.
Process. Horowitz argues that establishing a rigid, formal, almost bureaucratic process for compensation is the only way to protect the culture. You must institute a strict compensation committee that only reviews salaries twice a year, say in March and September.
So when the star engineer walks in on a random Tuesday in May and demands a raise, you don't evaluate the employee. You point to the system. You say, I hear you, you are doing incredible work, and I want to pay you more. But we evaluate compensation for everyone across the entire company in September. I will personally champion your case to the committee then.
It sounds rigid, but it removes the anxiety of office politics. It assures the quiet, introverted employee that they will be evaluated fairly and consistently without having to pound their fist on your desk.
Yes.
Process protects the culture from the loudest, most aggressive voices.
It reminds me of what Kirsty Nathoo and Carolyn Levy, two massive pillars of the Y Combinator ecosystem, talk about regarding legal and accounting foundations. They constantly warn founders that you need clean intellectual property assignments, you need strict vesting schedules for founder shares, and you need formal corporate structures from day one.
Absolutely essential.
Because if you don't have those, the company will eventually tear itself apart over equity disputes. Just like you need those rigid legal frameworks to keep the company legally sound, you need formal cultural processes like a rigid compensation cycle to keep the psychology of the company sound.
That is a perfect analogy. Legal structures protect the equity. Cultural structures protect the psychology.
Right.
Now let's assume you have built this foundation. You have a strong culture, you have empowered barrels, and you have clear delegation matrices in place. Your engine is fully built and idling on the runway.
Ready to go.
The next mechanical question is, in what direction do you point it? Because here is a dark truth about human nature. Left to their own devices, even a brilliant, highly capable, culturally aligned team will naturally gravitate toward comfortable work.
Which brings us to the concept of the North Star and the battle between A-plus problems and B-plus problems. Rabois issues a very stark warning here. He says that human beings have a deep biological, psychological aversion to the hardest, most vital tasks.
It is the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you give an incredibly smart employee a list of 3 priorities for the week. Priority number 1 is the A-plus problem. It is the existential threat to the company.
Like what?
It might be figuring out why user retention is dropping after 30 days. It is high impact, but it is intellectually painful, highly ambiguous, and there is no obvious solution. It requires staring at a blank whiteboard and feeling stupid for days.
Priorities 2 and 3 are the B-plus problems. Maybe it's redesigning the landing page, or organizing the shared Google Drive, or responding to partner emails.
If you do not force them, that employee will inevitably avoid the A-plus problem. They will tackle the B-plus problems first because those problems are solvable. They have clear steps. Completing them provides an immediate, soothing dopamine hit of accomplishment. They get to cross something off their list and feel productive.
We all do it. I do it every day. I will spend an hour perfectly organizing and color-coding my email inbox instead of writing the difficult strategy document that is actually going to move the needle on my career. I'm addicted to the easy dopamine of B-plus work.
Exactly. And at an organizational scale, an entire company addicted to B-plus work will eventually go bankrupt while looking incredibly busy. Rabois says a leader must force relentless, almost uncomfortable focus on just that one A-plus problem.
How do you force it?
He says you have to stand in front of your team and say, I do not want to hear about anything else you're doing. I don't care how beautiful your new landing page design is. I don't care how clean the code base is. Until we solve the 30-day retention problem, nothing else matters. Bang your head against the wall until the A-plus problem is conquered.
So what does this all mean? It means that maximizing output actually requires artificially constraining your team's options so they cannot hide from the hardest, most painful work. You have to take away their B-plus toys.
And at a macro level, across an entire enterprise, that singular focus translates into what Alex Schultz calls the North Star metric. When you have 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people working for you, you no longer have control, you only have influence. The North Star metric is the ultimate tool of influence. It ensures that the engineer in London, the marketer in Tokyo, and the support rep in Austin are all driving their individual margins of effort in the exact same vector.
But sometimes just telling people the North Star isn't enough. Sometimes focusing an organization on an A-plus problem requires rewiring the physical structure of the company to force them to feel the pain of a bad product. Kevin Hale, the founder of Wufoo, which was a hugely successful online form builder, gave this incredible breakdown of how they structurally fixed their feedback loop to force empathy.
This is one of the most brilliant examples of operational engineering. Hale noted that software developers naturally want to build exciting new features. They want to write elegant new code. They absolutely do not want to fix old bugs, write user documentation, or talk to confused customers.
No engineer wants to do that.
That is a B-plus preference that ignores the A-plus problem of user experience.
So Wufoo didn't just ask them nicely to care about the user. They instituted a policy called support-driven development. They forced the engineers and the designers to handle the frontline customer support tickets.
They structurally removed the abstraction. Paul English did the exact same thing when he founded Kayak. He literally installed a physical, ringing, red customer support phone right in the middle of the engineering floor. The engineers could not escape the noise of angry customers.
Sam Altman mentioned that the most successful founders in the Y Combinator portfolio actually take this a step further. They hook up PagerDuty directly to their customer ticketing system.
Oh, that's brutal.
It is. So if a user in Europe emails customer support at 3 a.m. Pacific time because the login button is broken, the founder's cell phones physically alarm next to their beds. They are jolted awake. They literally feel physical pain and sleep deprivation when their product sucks.
When a highly paid, brilliant engineer is forced to answer the exact same angry customer email 3 times in a row or is woken up at 3 a.m., their behavior changes instantly. They stop building the shiny new feature, they go into the code base, and they permanently fix the bug so the pain stops. It forces them to focus on the A-plus problem.
And Wufoo took it even further with their thank you cards. Kevin Hale mandated that his team spend time every single week handwriting physical thank you notes to their users, not automated emails, physical ink on paper.
Which takes a lot of time.
It does. Why? Because handwriting takes time. It forces the engineer to sit there, write the customer's name, acknowledge their business, and actively practice empathy. You cannot handwrite a thank you note to someone and then subsequently ignore their bug report. It wires the organization for user-centric focus.
And Hale noted the measurable ROI of this friction. By forcing the developers to handle the support tickets, the engineers realized that the reason they were getting so many questions was that their own user documentation was terrible.
Right, the users were confused.
So instead of answering tickets one by one, the engineers focused on rewriting the entire documentation hub. Overnight, their inbound support tickets dropped by 30%. That is the power of forcing the team to face the hardest problems directly.
But maintaining that laser focus on the A-plus problem is incredibly difficult when the outside world is constantly screaming at you. Altman explicitly warns founders against getting distracted by their own PR, reading their own press clippings, or obsessively worrying about competitors making noise in the media.
Peter Thiel echoes this sentiment perfectly. He points out that quantum leaps in innovation, the truly massive breakthroughs that create trillion-dollar companies, do not come from conducting massive focus groups to see what the average person wants.
They don't.
No, and they certainly don't come from staring sideways at your competitor and trying to copy their feature set. They come from a singular, borderline obsessive inward focus on solving a core A-plus problem better than anyone else in the world. If you are watching your competition, you are distracted from your North Star.
However, to solve those massive A-plus problems, the team needs A-plus information. You cannot ask an engineer to solve a highly complex systemic issue if they only hold one piece of the puzzle and the marketing team holds the other. This requires designing an organization where information flows violently, freely, and transparently across every silo.
We call this concept extreme transparency, and its primary function is to force organizational friction out into the open where it can be resolved. Rob Waugh talks about establishing a baseline, what we might call minimal viable transparency.
It starts with the physical architecture. Glass walls on all conference rooms. It sounds like a trivial interior design choice, but the psychology is profound.
Very profound.
If employees can physically see who is meeting with whom, they don't get paranoid. They don't sit at their desks wondering if the closed wooden door means layoffs are coming or secret alliances are forming.
Transparency is also about the ruthless distribution of information. Ravois suggests that notes from every single management meeting should be sent to a global email alias that the entire company can read. Furthermore, he advocates for taking the actual board decks, the highly sensitive financial and strategic presentations given to the venture capitalists, and reviewing every single slide with the entire employee base.
Obviously, you exclude individual compensation data, but you share the raw financial realities. You share the board's brutal critiques of the product. You share the cash runway. You treat the employees like adults who own the company.
Hossein Rahman, who's the CEO of Jawbone, details how absolutely vital this system-level communication is, especially in complex physical environments. If you are building a software app and a team gets misaligned, you write a patch and push an update an hour later.
Right. Software is malleable.
But if you are building consumer hardware, like Jawbone did with Bluetooth earpieces and fitness trackers, mistakes are fatal. Tooling a plastic mold in a factory in China takes 16 weeks and costs hundreds of thousands of dollars.
If the software team assumes the battery is going to be X size and the hardware team builds the casing for Y size, the entire product launch fails.
Exactly. The physics of hardware demand alignment. Rahman would force the battery engineer, the software algorithm developer, the material scientist, and the industrial designer into a daily, mandatory 2.5-hour meeting. They had to sit in that room and violently share their pain points.
I can imagine the friction in that room.
Yeah.
The industrial designer says, we need to make the casing 1 millimeter thinner so it looks sleek.
And because the battery engineer is sitting right next to them, the battery engineer fires back, if you make it 1 millimeter thinner, I have to shrink the battery cell. That means we lose 20% of the device's total power.
Which causes the software engineer to jump in and say, if you cut the power by 20%, my noise-canceling algorithm won't have enough juice to run, and the audio quality will be garbage.
That is the beauty of the system. Transparency forces the friction to happen in the conference room in April, rather than in the hands of the consumer in December. They are forced to understand the systemic trade-offs of every micro decision.
Altman emphasizes that as you scale past the initial core team of 30 employees, transparency transitions from just talking in a room to writing the law. You have to extensively document the how and the why of your operations. If you do not physically write down your operating procedures, your decision-making frameworks, and your cultural values, you end up with what he calls a random oral tradition.
It becomes a corporate game of telephone. A new hire joins, and instead of learning the optimized process, they just learn whatever bad habits the person sitting at the desk next to them happens to teach them. The culture and the operational efficiency degrade exponentially with every new cohort. You have to write it down.
And we should note that transparency shouldn't just be an internal exercise. You have to be completely uncomfortably transparent to the friction of the outside market. Emmett Shear of Twitch and Taylor Bosmany talk extensively about this concept of listening to the edges, meaning talking directly to the actual users and the enterprise clients.
Bosmini has a fantastic heuristic for this when it comes to enterprise sales.
Hmm.
He says that when you are on a discovery call with a potential massive client, you should only be talking 30% of the time.
Which violates the stereotype of the smooth-talking salesperson pitching the product.
Because pitching doesn't teach you anything. The other 70% of the call, you are just aggressively, transparently listening. You're asking, how do you solve this workflow today? What is the specific pain point that is costing you money? Why did you hate the competitor's software? What's fascinating here is that true transparency isn't just about sharing good news or high-fiving over revenue metrics at an all-hands meeting. It is about systematically exposing the internal frictions, the customer complaints, the engineering bottlenecks, and the board's criticisms so that the entire organism can learn, adapt, and survive.
Which sets us up perfectly for the final phase of building this machine. Because all of this high-level strategy, the editor framework, the 2x2 delegation matrix, the cultural process, the extreme transparency, it all sounds great in theory, but ultimately all of that abstract strategy has to manifest in the physical, minute, granular details of the daily operation. This is where the machine is truly stress-tested.
We are talking about the necessity of obsessing over the details, anchored by the philosophy that the score takes care of itself. Rabois shares the operational ethos of Bill Walsh, the legendary head coach who took the San Francisco 49ers from a dismal 2-14 record to becoming a dynasty of Super Bowl champions.
The incredible, almost paradoxical thing about Bill Walsh is that when he took over that broken team, he didn't focus on winning. He didn't hang up banners about the Super Bowl. He didn't give grand any given Sunday speeches about victory. He focused exclusively on what he called the standard of performance.
He obsessed over the absolute smallest, seemingly irrelevant details. He demanded that players tuck in their shirts perfectly on the practice field. He demanded that the receptionists at the front desk answer the phones with a highly specific professional phrasing. He demanded that the locker room be kept immaculately clean.
How does a clean locker room win a football game?
It is the psychology of compound perfection. Walsh believed that you cannot execute a highly complex, split-second offensive play on a Sunday if you were practicing sloppy habits on a Tuesday. If every single person in the organization, from the quarterback to the equipment manager to the receptionist, executes their specific granular task to the exact same standard of relentless perfection, the macro result, winning the game, takes care of itself. You do not control the final score. You only control the details of the execution.
Steve Jobs had this exact same philosophy regarding industrial design. He famously drove his engineers insane by insisting that the internal circuit boards of the early Mac computers be immaculately symmetrically designed. He wanted the traces to look beautiful. These were circuit boards that the consumer could literally never see. You couldn't even open the casing of the Mac without a specialized factory tool.
The engineers pushed back. They said, "Steve, nobody's ever going to see this." And Jobs replied, "I will know it's there." The standard of invisible excellence permeated the entire Apple culture. The logic is structural. If a team accepts a messy, chaotic circuit board simply because it is hidden, they will eventually compromise and accept a messy, chaotic user interface. The standard of perfection must be universal.
So, practically speaking, for a modern startup leader, this obsession with detail gets surprisingly unglamorous. Rabois argues that leaders must care deeply and personally about mundane things like the layout of the office space and the exact quality of the food being served at lunch.
It sounds trivial. It sounds like the opposite of high-level strategy. But it has massive systemic effects on organizational output. Rawa points out the physics of what happens if you serve bad, cheap food in the cafeteria.
Let's trace the domino effect. The food is bad, the employees sit down, take a bite, and they are dissatisfied.
Exactly. So what do? They don't talk about the new product launch. They walk away from their desks, they gather in the break room, and they spend their entire 45-minute lunch hour bonding over complaining about the soggy sandwiches. They wallow in shared misery.
They are generating friction instead of generating ideas.
Yes. By upgrading the food, by sweating that seemingly tiny detail, you remove a major friction point. You transform the lunch hour from a complaint session into a serendipitous brainstorming session where engineers from different teams collaborate over a great meal. In a very real way, the leader must act as a highly paid TaskRabbit. You're constantly running around identifying and clearing away these micro distractions, whether it's bad food, a broken printer, or a squeaky chair, so the barrels can perform at their absolute peak without interruption.
Altman backs this up, using the phrase that the leader must be a maniacal execution machine. The speed of the boss is the speed of the team. If the founder takes their foot off the gas to take a breath, the entire team will subconsciously signal off that relaxation and slow down their own output. You have to maintain an operating rhythm of constant, relentless shipping.
That's in a rhythm.
But I have to push back here because this feels contradictory. Earlier, we said the leader must be the editor. We said they have to let go of the pen and let the barrels work and delegate via the 2x2 matrix. Now you're telling me the leader needs to be maniacally sweating the details of the circuit boards and tasting the perky sandwiches. How do you reconcile that? How do you sweat the details without falling right back into the hero mode micromanagement trap that destroys companies?
It is a delicate balance, but the distinction lies in what exactly you're obsessing over. You are not micromanaging the solution to the A-plus problem. You delegated that solution to your barrels. You are micromanaging the environment to ensure they have the absolute perfect, frictionless conditions required to solve it. You are optimizing the physical and psychological machine. You are not doing the work of the machine. You are the mechanic, not the engine.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The distinction is between managing the work versus managing the environment. So let's look at the ultimate culmination of all this. When the environment is optimized, the details are dialed in, the barrels are loaded, the culture is strong, and the transparency is flowing. What is the ultimate macro result of this output? Why does all of this pain and discipline matter to the market?
When an organization is running with that level of mechanical perfection, it produces a very specific output in the eyes of the broader market and, crucially, in the eyes of top-tier investors. Mark Andreessen, one of the most successful venture capitalists in history, articulates this perfectly. He explains that top-tier investors are not looking to invest in a lack of weakness.
Right, they don't want the checkbox company that is just okay at engineering, okay at sales, and okay at marketing. Being consistently average is not a venture scale outcome.
They want extreme, overwhelming strength. And the true output of a flawlessly run organization is the systematic mathematical reduction of risk. Andreessen frames the entire life cycle of a startup and the entire process of raising millions of dollars in venture capital as the process of peeling away risk.
Like peeling the layers of an onion.
Precisely. You start on day one with a massive, terrifying ball of absolute risk. Will the tech work? Will anyone buy it? Can we hire people? With your seed round of funding, you use that capital to peel away product risk by building a working prototype. You prove the physics. Then, in your Series A round, you use that capital to peel away recruiting risk by successfully hiring a stellar executive team of barrels. In the Series B round, you peel away customer risk by proving high-margin retention at scale.
You are systematically manufacturing certainty out of chaos.
When a top-tier investor looks at a company that is operating with this level of mechanical precision, where the cultural invariants are locked in, the details are flawless, the internal communication is violently transparent, and the barrels are executing on the A-plus problems, they don't just see a good software product. The product is almost secondary.
What do they see?
They see an operational beast. They see an engine that entirely justifies the deployment of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of capital because the risk of poor execution has been engineered completely out of the system. The startup doesn't just build an app. It builds an engine that manufactures certainty in a deeply uncertain world.
So let's recap this incredible, complex journey we have been on. We started in the chaos, looking at a pile of duct tape, realizing that temporary brokenness and doing things that don't scale are essential to finding your initial wedge in the market.
We learned that to truly scale, the leader must undergo an identity shift, dropping the hammer and becoming the editor, using the red pen to simplify complexity down to 140 characters, and reallocating resources to the highest impact areas.
We explored the vital structural difference between ammunition and barrels, and the necessity of finding people who can survive the smoothie test and pull an abstract idea from inception to reality, creating a multiplier effect on your culture.
We examine the physics of delegation through Thiel's 2x2 matrix, understanding that good delegation means transferring agency, not just assigning research. We saw how culture acts as the operating system for that delegation, resolving the founder's bandwidth problem and protecting the psychology of the company from the shmoney dance of aggressive office politics.
We learned the painful necessity of forcing focus onto A-plus problems by hooking up PagerDuty and writing thank you cards to engineer empathy. We discussed communicating with extreme transparency to expose friction, and finally, why sweating the absolute smallest details, even the cafeteria food, ensures that the score takes care of itself.
And ultimately, all of this mechanical discipline serves one singular macroeconomic purpose, systematically peeling away risk to manufacture certainty for the market.
Whether you are prepping for a high-stakes boardroom meeting, managing a small retail team, or honestly just trying to organize the chaotic inputs of your own personal life, the mechanics of output remain exactly the same. You are the editor of your own operation.
The underlying principles of radical focus, calculated delegation, and relentless continuous refinement apply to any system, personal or professional, that you want to optimize.
So we will leave you with one final provocative challenge to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. If you applied Keith Rabois' ruthless red editing pen to your own calendar tomorrow morning, what recurring meetings, what comfortable tasks, and what legacy habits would you instantly cross out? And more importantly, what massive existential A-plus problem in your life have you been actively avoiding because you are addicted to the easy, comfortable dopamine of solving B-plus problems?